Hollywood loves to sell us the future, but rarely the future we were supposed to see. Some of the most iconic science fiction films began as much darker, stranger, and more terrifying visions before executives stepped in with scissors. What happens when apocalyptic endings, violent truths, or twisted revelations get scrubbed into something palatable? Today, we're peeling back the curtain on 15 forbidden sci-fi ideas Hollywood watered down. And trust me, some of these cuts will leave you unsettled. The Day the Earth Stood Still, 1951. Imagine walking out of a theater in 1951 not with a hopeful warning from Klaatu, but with humanity literally wiped off the map. That was the darker version of The Day the Earth Stood Still. Director Robert Wise and screenwriter Edmund North originally envisioned an ending where Earth ignored Klaatu's warning, triggering alien technology that obliterated every nuclear arsenal, and along with it, every major city. In other words, a cinematic mushroom cloud. But studio executives balked. They feared American audiences still reeling from Hiroshima and Nagasaki would revolt at such imagery. Instead, we got the polished speech ending where Klaatu urges humans to pursue peace under threat of destruction. Hopeful? Maybe. Sanitized? Absolutely. The studio knew a bleak finale wouldn't sell tickets or win the approval of Cold War-era censors. The original cut would have been one of the most daring endings in cinema, predicting decades of nuclear paranoia and leaving audiences with a chilling certainty. Humanity doesn't change. By pulling their punches, Hollywood turned a groundbreaking idea into a lecture that felt safer for family audiences. And that choice cemented the film as a Cold War allegory with a cautiously optimistic slant, rather than the nihilistic masterpiece it might have been. Soylent Green, 1973. Most people remember Soylent Green for Charlton Heston's infamous line, but few realize how much worse it could have been. In early drafts, the dystopian nightmare wasn't just a shocking revelation that Soylent Green is people. Instead, the world was run by sprawling human farms, industrial complexes where people were harvested like cattle, processed in full view, and fed back into the system as food. Richard Fleischer, the director, pushed to visualize this horror. Imagine conveyor belts of bodies, vast factories pumping out green wafers, and workers treating humans like livestock. But MGM executives got cold feet. They worried that showing mass-scale cannibal production would move the film from social commentary into grotesque exploitation. The compromise? Leave the horror largely implied, hidden behind a single last-minute revelation. By sanitizing the concept, the studio ensured the movie played more like a thriller with a twist than a full-blown societal autopsy. Yet those lost sequences would have hammered the story's warning home. Unchecked corporates back. Greed doesn't just exploit, it consumes. The muted version gave us one of the great dystopian films, but the darker cut could have stood as the most haunting indictment of industrial capitalism ever put on screen. Sometimes, what's left unseen tells you exactly how far Hollywood wasn't willing to go. Robocop, 1987. Paul Verhoeven never set out to make a family-friendly cyborg adventure. His Robocop was meant to be a blood-soaked satire about corporate fascism in America. The first cut of the film was so intense the MPAA slapped it with an X rating, not once, but 11 times. The infamous boardroom scene? Originally, the malfunctioning robot shot the executive for a full 40 seconds, shredding his body into pulp. Murphy's execution? An unflinching massacre where his body is destroyed piece by piece. Each cut dulled the razor edge of Verhoeven's critique. To him, the violence wasn't gratuitous. It was the punchline. Corporate America destroying its workers wasn't metaphorical. It was literal. But to Hollywood, that was too much. To secure an R rating, Verhoeven reluctantly trimmed his scenes, though he managed to sneak back much of his vision in the later director's cut. Even muted, the film still shook audiences with its mix of satire and gore. But the original uncensored version would have been one of the most uncompromising takedowns of corporate cruelty ever smuggled into theaters. Instead, Robocop became infamous for its ultra-violence while hiding the fact that its most damning blows never made it past the censors. Sometimes the real crime isn't on screen. It's what got erased. Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 1956. Don Siegel's invasion of the body snatchers is already creepy, but the version you've seen is a watered-down compromise. The original plan ended with the pods already winning, humanity fully doomed. The story would close with Dr. Miles Bennell running through the streets screaming about pod people only to collapse in despair as the invasion spreads unchecked. Roll credits, no help, no hope, just alien silence swallowing the world. But test audiences revolted, calling the film too depressing. Studio executives stepped in, ordering an added hospital frame story, where Bennell's warning gets taken seriously and the FBI is alerted. Suddenly, what could have been one of the most terrifyingly nihilistic films of the Cold War became a safe allegory with a chance for salvation. That shift robbed the movie of its teeth. A bleak ending would have cemented it as the ultimate paranoia piece, a cinematic nightmare where conformity wins and individualism dies. Instead, we got reassurance that government institutions might step in to save the day. Ironically, the bleaker version would have made the film more prophetic, echoing modern fears of invisible invasions, biological, digital, or ideological, that no one can stop once they start. Instead of dread, Hollywood gave us a small flashlight in the darkness. The Matrix, 1999. Here's one that will shock even hardcore fans. In the early drafts of The Matrix, Neo didn't come back. That's right. After taking the bullets from Agent Smith, he was supposed to die permanently. No resurrection, no godlike powers. No, he is the one. Just a failed rebellion and the haunting message that the system always wins. But Warner Brothers hated it. They needed a hero, not a martyr. With sequels in mind, they demanded a triumphant rebirth, transforming Neo into a literal messiah figure. The darker version, where his sacrifice sparks doubt but not victory, was tossed aside in favor of blockbuster myth-making. Imagine the alternate legacy. The Matrix as a one-and-done cyberpunk tragedy, remembered as one of the boldest endings in film history. Instead, it became the seed for a sprawling franchise that leaned harder into action spectacle than dystopian philosophy. By resurrecting Neo, Hollywood turned an anarchist fable into a superhero origin story. And while the final product is still iconic, you can't help but wonder how much scarier, and perhaps truer, would the story feel if the system crushed even its greatest challenger? In that cut, The Matrix doesn't lose. The Matrix wins. Alien 1979. Ridley Scott's Alien is already one of the bleakest sci-fi horror films ever made, but his original vision went even darker. In Scott's early notes, Ripley doesn't survive the final showdown. Instead, the xenomorph kills her, then mimics her voice to send a chilling message back to Earth. Imagine that transmission. Calm, human-sounding words hiding the ultimate predator waiting for pickup. It would have been the cruelest gut punch in sci-fi history. But 20th Century Fox executives said no way. They were already gambling with a risky R-rated horror film in space. Killing the heroine was considered box office suicide. They wanted at least a hint of survival, someone for the audience to cheer. The compromise gave us Ripley's harrowing escape and cemented her as cinema's first great female action hero. Still, think about the impact of that forbidden ending. No survivors, no catharsis, only the monster inheriting the story. It would have flipped the genre on its head, suggesting that humanity isn't just vulnerable, we're replaceable. Instead, Hollywood steered the franchise towards sequels, expanding Ripley into a full-blown action icon. That worked commercially, but the darker cut would have left viewers with nightmares about a creature not only killing us, but speaking in our voices. Sometimes, the scariest thing isn't what hunts us, it's what replaces us. Terminator 2, 1991. James Cameron's Terminator 2 is celebrated for its groundbreaking action and emotional core, but the studio forced him to pull his bleakest idea. In Cameron's darker cut, Judgment Day, the nuclear apocalypse, happens no matter what. No amount of sacrifice. No amount of rewriting the future can stop it. Sarah Connor's desperate fight was doomed from the start. Cameron loved the concept of inevitability, showing humans as powerless against fate. But TriStar executives hated it. They wanted hope, not despair. The ending was rewritten to include a highway scene with Sarah narrating about a future where Judgment Day may never come. It was Hollywood's way of softening the blow and keeping the door open for sequels. The lost version would have been devastating. Instead of a victory, the film would have been a tragedy about our inability to change destiny. It also would have reinforced Cameron's larger message about human self-destruction. Machines weren't our downfall, we were. By making the future uncertain, the studio kept the franchise alive, but they robbed T2 of a finale that could have made it one of the boldest mainstream films ever released. Instead of inevitability, we got franchise optimism. And from there, the endless sequels kept rolling. Planet of the Apes, 1968. The famous twist of Planet of the Apes, Charlton Heston collapsing before the ruined Statue of Liberty, wasn't the harshest ending on the table. In Pierre Boulez's original novel, humanity is already completely destroyed. There's no symbol of the past, no ruins, no survivors, just a dead planet where apes have permanently replaced humans. It wasn't ironic, it was final. Hollywood producers balked at that level of bleakness. They wanted shock, not despair. By leaving remnants of human civilization, they gave audiences something to gasp at rather than mourn. The Statue of Liberty reveal is legendary, but it's also a compromise, a visual gut punch instead of a total existential wipeout. The watered-down twist still resonates as one of cinema's greatest endings. Yet imagine the darker version. No artifacts, no hope, no warning, just a complete erasure of humanity's existence. It would have transformed Planet of the Apes from a cautionary tale into a full-blown funeral for mankind. The safer choice won out, but in doing so, Hollywood traded tragedy for spectacle. Sometimes a single monument is easier to stomach than the silence of an empty earth. Blade Runner, 1982. Ridley Scott's Blade Runner went through so many edits it practically became a case study in studio interference. But the most radical idea? Deckard doesn't escape with Rachel. In Scott's darker cut, Deckard realizes he's a replicant, accepts the truth, and quietly disappears, leaving no happy ending. No romance, only the ambiguity of whether he ever truly existed. Warner Bros. Executives panicked. They insisted on slapping on a studio-mandated happy ending, complete with sunlit driving shots recycled from The Shining. Audiences hated it, which led to multiple recuts, and eventually the final cut Scott prefers. Even then, the bleakest possibility, Deckard's complete erasure, never saw daylight. That lost idea would have made Blade Runner one of the most tragic anti-hero stories in sci-fi. Instead, the studio softened it into something resembling a noir romance. What we got was still brilliant, but what we lost was the purest form of dystopia. A man discovering he's not even a man, then fading into irrelevance. Sometimes Hollywood doesn't just cut a scene, they cut the soul of the story. The Thing, 1982. John Carpenter's The Thing was already one of the most disturbing sci-fi horror films of its era, but the director's earliest drafts made it even more hopeless. In one version, there is no final standoff between MacReady and Childs. Instead, the alien organism spreads, consumes the last survivors, and ensures Earth's total infection. No fire, no chance, no ambiguity, just the end of humanity. Universal Pictures wouldn't touch it. Executives already worried the film was too bleak for summer audiences, especially releasing in the same year as the optimistic E.T. They forced Carpenter to add an ambiguous finale, leaving MacReady and Childs staring at each other in the cold, uncertain who is human and who isn't. Even that ending felt daring, but the darker cut would have been an all-time nihilistic statement. Imagine closing on the creature spreading unchecked beneath the snow, with no survivors left to warn the world. Instead of a cult classic, The Thing might have been branded too grim to watch. Hollywood demanded at least a shred of doubt, even if it meant softening what could have been the most terrifying apocalyptic ending in sci-fi. The Mist, 2007. Frank Darabont's The Mist is infamous for its gut-wrenching ending, where survivors give up hope and then watch salvation arrive too late. But what many people forget is how close that finale came to being erased. MGM executives begged Darabont to change it. They wanted a more uplifting conclusion, something that would leave audiences shaken but not destroyed. Maybe the survivors make it to safety. Maybe the military arrives just in time. Anything but the soul-crushing bleakness we got. Darabont refused. He fought tooth and nail to keep his ending intact, calling it the only honest way to finish the story. And yet, even his version was toned down from Stephen King's original novella, which deliberately left the survivor's fate unresolved. King himself later admitted he preferred Darabont's twist because it went further than he ever dared. But what's fascinating is how Hollywood almost scrubbed away one of the boldest endings in modern horror. Imagine if the studio had won. The Mist would have been remembered as just another monster movie with a narrow escape. Instead, it became a cultural talking point, the rare sci-fi horror that dared to rip out its audience's heart in the final minutes. The Forbidden Cut wasn't darker, it was lighter. And sometimes, that's even scarier to think about because had the studio succeeded, one of the most devastating gut punches in cinema might have been replaced by a pat on the back. A Clockwork Orange, 1971. Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange has always been divisive, but here's what most people don't realize. Warner Brothers actively pushed to emphasize style over substance, stripping away the ending of Anthony Burgess's novel that offered Alex a path to redemption. In the book's original conclusion, Alex grows weary of violence, dreams of starting a family, and imagines a more hopeful future. It's a reflection on the possibility of moral growth. Kubrick tossed it out. His film ends with Alex gleefully returning to his violent fantasies, backed by Beethoven and smug grins. It's an unforgettable finale, but it's also a conscious watering down of the source material's moral arc. Why? Because Warner Brothers executives didn't think audiences wanted to see rehabilitation. They wanted provocation, shock, and style. And so the studio steered Kubrick toward emphasizing the ultraviolence, the flashy imagery, and the nihilistic irony. The forbidden idea, the one that never made it to screen, was redemption itself. Alex's evolution into something more human. By denying that, Hollywood turned the story into a stylistic firestorm without the deeper resolution Burgess intended. The result was iconic cinema, but also a cautionary tale about what happens when studios prioritize controversy over completeness. Sometimes the forbidden cut isn't more violent or shocking, it's more hopeful. And that, apparently, was too risky. Gattaca, 1997. Andrew Nicole's Gattaca is one of the most understated and chilling sci-fi films of the 1990s, but its ending was rewritten into something palatable. In early drafts, Vincent, the genetically inferior hero, is discovered during his final mission. Instead of triumphing against the odds, he is executed as a criminal for daring to cheat the system. His dream of space travel is shattered not by failure, but by society's unforgiving rules. Test audiences hated it. They demanded something more uplifting. Studio heads agreed, insisting on a finale where Vincent makes it onto the rocket, narrating his victory over genetic determinism. It was inspiring, but it was also a massive dilution of Nicole's bleak message, that no matter how hard we fight, systems of control will always win. The forbidden ending would have left audiences shaken, forcing them to face the cruelty of eugenics without escape. Instead, Hollywood gave us a minor triumph to balance the cynicism. The irony? Even in its softened state, Gattaca didn't find box office success, but in the years since, it's become a cult classic precisely because of its themes. Still, one can't help but wonder, had they gone with the harsher ending, would the film have been remembered not just as prescient, but prophetic? Starship Troopers, 1997. Paul Verhoeven's Starship Troopers was marketed as a glossy action spectacle, but the director's original intent was far more dangerous. He wanted a grim parody, an unflinching satire of militarism and propaganda. The script contained even more overt fascist imagery, including soldiers indoctrinated from childhood and civic duty drills that blurred the line between patriotism and totalitarianism. TriStar executives grew nervous. They worried audiences wouldn't get the joke and might take the film at face value as a pro-military adventure. So, much of Verhoeven's satire was buried under flashy effects and tongue-in-cheek performances. What could have been an outright condemnation of authoritarianism became a bizarre hybrid, part biting parody, part popcorn blockbuster. Over the years, fans and critics have reevaluated the movie, recognizing its subversive humor, but the fact remains. The darkest cut, the one Verhoeven wanted, would have removed all doubt. It would have been unmistakably terrifying in its critique, with fewer winks and more bile. Instead, Hollywood gave us a watered-down middle ground. The result was confusion at the box office, where many viewers missed the satire entirely. The forbidden version might have been too sharp for comfort, but it would have carved itself into history as one of the boldest anti-fascist statements ever put to film. E.T. 1982. Steven Spielberg's E.T. is one of the most beloved family films of all time, but it almost wasn't. Spielberg's early drafts included a scene where E.T. is captured, dissected, and studied by government scientists. No glowing heart, no triumphant bike ride across the moon, no teary farewell. Just a lifeless alien body turned into another casualty of human curiosity. Universal panicked. This was the same studio banking on E.T. to be a summer crowd pleaser. They demanded the darker material be stripped away, insisting on a child-friendly narrative about wonder and friendship. Spielberg himself later admitted that as a young filmmaker, he leaned too heavily into cynicism before realizing the movie would work better as a hopeful fairy tale. The forbidden version, however, would have been unforgettable. It would have stood not as a heartwarming classic, but as a brutal commentary on government control and mankind's inability to accept the other. It would have traumatized children, shocked parents, and likely tanked Spielberg's career. Instead, the softer cut became a global phenomenon, cementing E.T. as a symbol of innocence and magic. But somewhere out there, hidden in early drafts, exists a story where the alien never made it home, because humanity never gave him the chance. So, what did we learn? Hollywood has always flirted with the forbidden, then trimmed the edges to keep audiences comfortable. For every shocking twist we remember, there's an even darker version buried in script drafts and studio memos. And maybe that's the real story. The scariest futures aren't the ones we saw, but the ones we were never allowed to. Which forbidden cut do you wish had survived? Drop your thoughts below and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.